richer. So, before I conclude my short speech here, um, I don't know how many of you how many of you are aware of the recent development in USA, where the US Academy of Motion Picture, the Oscar group, the Hollywood Association of Producers, etc. So they had in 1973 an important event had happened. Shashim Little Feather, an Native American um, Hollywood actor who represented uh, who is that? Marlon Brando. Marlon Brando, who got Oscar for The Godfather. So Marlon Brando was supporting the Native American struggle in the US at that point of time. So 1973, so 50 years ago. So, so Sachin Little Feather was representing Marlon Brando and was supposed to refuse Oscar on his behalf because Marlon Brando said that this is injustice and with the mark of protest, he was refusing Oscar. And on the stage, Sachin Little Feather came and uh, gave a speech, less than 1 minute speech that was reduced to within 1 minute, and so she couldn't read out the formal letter that Marlon Brando had written. And but anyway, the moment she spoke about her inability to accept the award on behalf of Marlon Brando, and she was booed, then subsequently heckled, and then threatened with arrest, etc., etc., and she was blacklisted from Hollywood. She never again could act in Hollywood films. But 50 years after that, um, now the American Academy of Motion Pictures has apologized to her for the injustice done to her, and she has been now invited as the guest of honor on September 17, 2022. She will be there as guest of honor. So the point is that I mean, this is something that inspires us. This kind of stories of the heroes who have been representing the voices of indigenous people are heroes for us, and I'm sure all of you will cherish the spirit of that rebellion and continue the struggle of Shashan Little Feather, or it is Birsa Munda, or any other Jaipal Singh Munda, etc. All our heroes who have been raising the voice of the marginalized communities to make the world a better place for all of us. So let us celebrate the strength and spirit of diversity. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your precious speech. Now, please give a warm welcome to Dr. Sai Thakur. It is a privilege to invite her on stage to talk about today's theme.
Good evening and Zohar, all of you. Uh, it's uh, this is the third time in last 1 week that I am speaking to you. And as Sir said, you know, when initially some of you approached me for this particular uh, occasion and speech, to give a speech or a talk as a speaker, my first reaction was, why don't you call someone from a community who is a tribal community? And I gathered from what they told me that due to lockdown, uh, there has been students have come just now, and it's too late for us to contact someone from outside and get a date, and that inviting that person was not possible. So this practical difficulty which your you face, some of your friends face, uh, I thought that I shouldn't insist on calling somebody from the community. Whereas, as I pointed out, it is a bit, what you can say, embarrassing or uncomfortable to stand here and uh, speak about, or I will come to this, speak about, speak for, or speak to, you know, uh, mind my words. I'm saying speak about, speak for, or speak to. Um, that is what I would, in the very beginning, talk about. I'm sure you understand the differences when I say speak about, speak for, and speak to. And these are the differences which I would, at the very beginning, bring to your notice, and I think those are very important differences. With this in the small, phrase where I'm saying to, for, and about. So actually, this came to my mind when I sat down to think and prepare for the talk, and then I was thinking, what am I doing? This is the World Indigenous Day. Uh, Indigenous people stands for communities which were earlier called tribal, or in India we have different terms. So, who am I to speak on this occasion? That's the reason why I said, someone from the community should, come and speak. And over the past few years, since when the students on this Tuljapur campus have been celebrating Indigenous Peoples Day, they have been very particular about inviting someone from these communities. And in India, as I said, we have Adivasis, basically those tribal groups from Sridhar region, Central Indian region, and Western Indian region who refer to themselves as Adivasis. Whereas the tribes in Northeast are very particular about not calling themselves Adivasis. They prefer perhaps tribe or indigenous people or their specific names which are there in the Northeast, like specific tribal groups like Nagas or Kukis or Bodos, Mizos. So these are tribal groups or clusters of tribes which are specific to specific regions. So when I started thinking about this, and I was wondering, what am I doing here? And when I say what am I doing here, as Professor initially pointed out, this whole thing is, the organization of this event and me speaking is a particular kind of a politics. Politics not in the negative sense, but politics in a very positive sense. We are saying certain things about issues which concern the tribals, and so this is a particular kind of a politics. And since if you look at the title of the talk, it says identity, politics, and gender. So we will come to the point where we discuss why we call this as politics and is this really politics. So my question for myself in the very beginning is, what is my politics here? And I believe I have a certain kind of politics here. And I believe each one of you has. Now, as I said, what am I doing here? If you look at the slide I have said, then what am I doing here on the occasion of Indigenous Peoples Day, which celebrates the culture and the experiences of tribal people who are earlier called tribes. Now we call Indigenous people. So my question: am I representing the tribals, or am I just talking about it? So the question, I'm posing to you also. What do you think? Am I representing the tribals, or am I, not representing them? And if I'm not representing them, then what am I doing here? So then the question comes, in order to answer these two questions, we first need to, perhaps say or define what we mean by representing someone. So what is representation? When you say I'm representing someone, what do we mean? So I did a quick Google search, and what is representation? And the first definition, not one definition, I got two meanings, two different ways in which the word representation was defined. The first one was the way that somebody or something is shown or described. Yeah? So, for example, the tricolor represents the Indian nation. Yeah? So, when you see a tricolor, we are talking about the Indian society or the Indian nation, the country, India as a country. But if you look at the second definition, it says having somebody to speak for you. So actually, it's, the two meanings I find are actually contradictory. In the first definition, there's something which is talking about something. It's perhaps not the thing itself that is talking about itself. There's something else who's talking about it. So for example, you have stories about what happened to tribals in the Red Corridor or the areas where the Naxals are quite active. So someone is writing a news report about what are the experiences of tribals. And then there is, an occasion where the tribals themselves who are in those areas talk about their experiences. So I think these two things are very different, and I'm basically talking about, or actually wanting to differentiate between the two. So the question is, if we are talking about representation, say in this case, indigenous people or tribes, and this question can also arise for Dalits, it can also arise for OBCs, it can also arise for women, or it can also arise for various kind of non-heterosexual gender identities. Queer is one large umbrella term for various kinds of gender identities. So who will represent these communities? And the obvious answer perhaps is that someone from those communities only can represent themselves. This is an understanding at which we have arrived quite late, quite recently. Quite for a very long time, we have had non-tribals representing tribals, we have had non-Dalits representing Dalits, we have had, men representing women. So it's only of late that people have started, talking about this idea that particular identity. Now here we are talking about identities and what we mean by identity, we also come to that. But these are basically social identities, and there is an understanding that someone from those social groups would talk about themselves. So now that I am here for whatever logistic reasons or whatever practical difficulties, then what do I do? I don't want to occupy the space of a particular social group for obvious reasons. So that is the reason why I wouldn't want to do this. So then what do I do? When I stand here, what do I do actually? And then, as I said in the beginning, what is my politics in speaking on the occasion of Indigenous peoples? Now, after a lot of thinking, I arrived at a conclusion that I am not representing tribals here, obviously because I'm not a tribal. The nuances and theoretical, conceptual, nitty-gritties of whether I can represent someone or not, I am not bringing them here. I'm leaving it behind. But then I'm clear that I don't want to represent tribes. Then what do? I have another option that I talk about tribes. So I don't speak for someone, but I speak about someone. There's a difference. There's a difference where I'm not saying that I know what you feel or I know what your problems are and this is what I think should be done about it. So, but if I don't want to do that, then the only choice is talking about tribes, but that is something which, as I pointed out, has been happening for a long time. A lot of people have been talking about tribes, and then I said, that I don't want to do. I don't want to say that I'm a non-tribal, but I want to say this about the tribal community. So finally, I arrived at this stage where I'm saying that neither do I want to represent, nor do I want to talk about, in that sense, talking about others in the sense that I know everything about them and I know the solutions to these problems and I will tell them what they have to do. Not in that sense, but as you can see on the screen, I'm saying that I want to talk to them. And I think talking to them is very, very important. So talking to you, this is what, this is my, position here. I don't want to represent or speak for, or neither do I want to, talk about them, but I want to talk to them, or talk to you. And here, to you involves a lot of tribal students, as, the girls who were speaking before me, from Santhal tribe or Orang tribe or Ho, Kharia, and I can see a lot of students from Northeast as well. They belonging to their own, but there are a lot of non-tribal students here also. So I am, in the sense, talking to them also. So I am here, talking about having a dialogue. So. The structure of the program is where I speak and you listen. Usually in the class I would like to have a dialogue, but here that is not possible literally. We are not actually doing that literally. But I I just want you to keep in mind that I would like to conduct this in the format of a conversation or a dialogue. So I am, placing my ideas here, and I'm perhaps inviting you to think about them, to engage with those ideas. Yeah. So now, when some of you came and met me and told me that they wanted me to speak on this topic, I asked them, what do you want me to focus on? And then after a lot of discussion, we arrived at this point that we want to talk about identity politics and gender. So you can see, on your banner, it's put that identity politics, gender and tribes in India. Now, identity politics is talked a lot about, generally not just in the context of tribals, but also in the context of various other marginalized groups. And separately, and gender is also talked about, especially with reference to tribes or lower caste groups, but separately. Here, what I want to do is bring these two rather separated, arenas together. And so, when it comes to tribal identities and gender, what I immediately thought was about the various, if you do a Google search, and you can do it, and check this out. If you do a Google search on tribes, or leave aside tribes, but if you do a Google search on Indian culture or Hindu culture, yeah, and you click on the option of images, what do you get? Yeah, so I'm first beginning with Hindu culture, and what do you get in the images? You get this, or similar images, or you get this, or similar images, or this, for example. So, what is my point? My point is, when it comes to culture, tradition, identities, you usually get, nicely decked up, dressed in, colors, women. So when we talk about the representation of, say, Hindu culture, we usually get women who are dressed up like this. And so, what is it different when it comes to tribes? And sadly, it's not different. Not very different. There is some difference. So initially, I searched about Nagaland, and then I got these kind of images where the Naga women are dressed in the traditional attire. But when I searched for Nagaland, I also got a lot of men dressed in these kind of colorful attires. But when I searched for tribes, for example, in Odisha, this is the website also. Now, this website, if you look at, there are no men. They're all women. So these are Gond women, or Kandha tribe, or Kandha women, or Santhal women. If you look up for Jharkhand, I don't know which tribe they belong to. Is this an attire which is specific to a particular tribe? I don't know. It was not mentioned there. But there are men as well. There are men as well in some photos, but largely they are women. Okay. So in Maharashtra also, Maharashtra has around 7 to 8% of tribal population. These are Bharti women and these are Gond women. Yeah. So my point is, a lot of times when people talk about their cultural identities or traditions, women become the representatives. And women decked in or dressed up in, their traditional attire with all the ornaments and all. So it might appear that, or one might say that, women are are the representatives of those tribes or those communities. But if you look at closely to various tribes, not just the Central Indian or Chota Nagpur region tribes, but also tribes in Northeast India. If you dig deeper into their cultural practices, the picture is slightly different. Now, so having made this point about how women are projected as representatives of various cultures, but when it comes to actual everyday life and everyday practices, the situation is slightly different. So we will come to that in a while. What I mean by that. So what I would like to now first come to, and now let me also tell you that in this whole presentation I am looking at identity politics and gender rather theoretically. I'm trying to theorize, or I'm trying to use theories which explain this connection. Now, how do I understand this? So, I first began with what exactly do we mean by identity and the way identity is being used now. Now, when we say identity, we are basically talking about social identities, and these social identities basically are non-economic identities. So race, caste, ethnicity, nation, gender, and within ethnicity or outside ethnicity, we can also add tribe. These are the basis of identification. And the word identity has been in use since 1950s, and in the field of psychology, there was someone called Erickson, after whose usage the term identity became quite popular. There is a lot of criticism about identity politics. I'm sure you must have been aware of it. So identity is something which is not connected with institutional structures and political economy. A lot of Marxists or neo-Marxists would argue that identities are things which don't talk about real problems. They don't talk about institutional structures. They don't talk about political economy, which are the real quote-unquote issues. Yeah? And so their whole talk about distinct group identities is basically about cultural differences. And when you say cultural differences, if you look at the last point, these arguments about various social identities become very essentialist. Now, what is essentialism? What do you mean by essentialism? Basically, essentialism means that people are born with these identities and they cannot be changed. Now, what is the problem with essentialism? The problem with essentialism is that, in a way, you're saying that this cannot be changed. And so, if it cannot be changed, if these people are poor, they are going to be poor. If they are marginalized, they are going to be marginalized. And if you stretch this to its logical end, if they are not intelligent, they are going to remain non-intelligent. If they don't have merit, they will remain without merit because they are born like that. So that is what essentialism usually is understood as. And so that it is problematic because you're treating some identities or certain characteristics as unchangeable. Yeah? And so people criticize identity politics for veering towards essentialism. And so they say that when you talk about identity politics, it is something which deviates from a universal plan of change, right? Say a communist revolution cannot be thought about if you talk about cultural identities or ethnic identities. Yeah? And so there is no end. Every group, every social identity can further be divided into smaller social identities, and it's like splintering after splintering of those groups. So there is no universal vision to identity politics, and therefore it's by nature retrograde. It's by nature something which will ruin the vision of society. there are scholars, and I found one very interesting book by Fukuyama, where he says that identity needs to be understood differently. He says that, identities are important, and he in fact says that identities actually stem from one very basic aspect of human nature. It's something which is ingrained in human nature, this whole idea about identity. So what is an identity? So identity is not just stored or concentrated in a person who claims a particular identity, but it also depends upon the other person. Because your identity doesn't depend only upon what you think about what your identity is, but it also depends upon what others think. Without that, identity is not possible. It has these two dimensions. So, one's true inner self, what you think you are, as well as what others think you are. And the problem comes in when there is a contradiction. You think you are intelligent, but the other person thinks you are not. Yeah. So the whole issue of identity is rooted in this. This dual ways of identifying someone. One self identifying oneself and the other identifying you. Yeah. So, and in most of the cases you will see, in the context of Dalits, in the context of tribals, you will find that that social group thinks about itself in a manner, but the others think in an opposite manner. Now, so this inner self or inner value, the modern times actually this whole idea became very popular or accepted that every individual has some or the other, worth, inner worth. Everybody is born equal and everybody is equally worthy. So this inner self is intrinsically valuable. Okay, and since everybody has that equal worth, if someone thinks about someone as inferior, it's problematic. So now this is very important. Now this inner self is very, very closely connected with a sense of dignity. So if you think you are worthy, you are actually claiming a particular kind of a dignity for yourself. And when someone says that you are not worthy, that dignity is refused to you. You're told that you are not worthy, you are not equal, and which means there is a loss of dignity. Now, therefore, every individual tries to attain or claim that dignity which is already there or should be. And so there is a seeking of recognition. When you seek dignity, you're basically seeking recognition. That you please recognize me, I am as equal or as worthy as you. And so identity politics, according to me, is this quest or this claim on dignity. So in that sense, identity politics, according to me, is a very powerful, a very important, quest of dignity. So identity politics is not, doesn't lack a larger vision. In fact, it has a larger vision than just the vision which tries to eliminate poverty or tries to eliminate economic inequalities. So that is the reason why Me Too became such a movement. It was a claim on women's equal worth and dignity. And when that was denied, women spoke about it. Yeah? And so likewise it is true for all social identities. Now, I was looking up and I found this one very interesting study of basically about the Santhal tribe in Jharkhand, Dumka district. Now, this table shows how the Santhal or the tribals are looked at by the state or by the outer society. So how are males looked at lazy, drunk, simple, savage. This is how the state looks at the Santhal people in that district, in that village. Whereas the community looks at itself, or the men look at themselves as cultivators, protectors, and those who safeguard the interests of the community. That is what I was talking about. The community thinks of itself as something whereas the state and the outer society thinks about them as something different. So the females are looked at as hardworking, simple, but promiscuous. They are available for anybody. This is how the outer society looks at them. But they look at themselves as homemakers, workers, and producers. So that you can see that there is a contradiction. And then there is very much a need for an identity politics, which claims that your way of looking at us is not what we are. Our way of looking at us is very different, and you need to change your way of looking at us. Yeah. So identity politics is about that. That is what I think. Now, if that's fine. That's about the whole community. But then another question comes into mind, and if you have noticed, you can see how gender identities are connected with this sense of identity. The men, how they think about themselves, and the women, how they think about themselves. Now, this is for the larger, maybe the tribe or the larger social group. But how does it, get expressed at the level of the community in the village, or what we can call the micro level? Now, I wouldn't, go deeper into this, but when you look at these communities, especially tribal communities in, central India, usually there are two domains: the domestic domain and the political domain. Now, if you look at the domestic domain, women are equally participating, and this can be, applied to a range of tribes, also from Northeast India. That they have an equal share in production and production-related activities. So agriculture or PT trade also. Like in Northeast, you will find women, all women markets. In markets you will find all the vendors are women. This is very common, and so they have an equal or perhaps more than equal share in agricultural production. And reproduction, of course. But when it comes to the political domain, which represents a wider social relationships, and also the issues about autonomy, self-governance, or self-determination. Many tribes in Northeast, for example, have fought for their separate states, or Nagaland or Naga tribes have been asking for a separate nation. So this whole domain where the tribes talk about self-determination or autonomy are usually exclusively male domains. If you look at, for example, the various kinds of self-governance institutions in tribes, so you have, I think, for example, among the Mudas, you have something called the Para, where the whole community is organized in smaller, groups who make decisions for themselves, collectively. In all these arenas, it's mainly men, and so the important sphere of decision making is occupied by men. Now, this grassroots level division of labor of sorts is very, very closely connected with the larger level collective identities of tribes. So these groups or these self-governing bodies are basically very closely connected with clans or lineages of those communities in different villages, where the men are seen as the protectors and providers. So what I'm trying to argue is that these kinship groups, which are local patrilineal, land, all these are connected with the identity of the community. At the grassroots level or at the local level, micro level, they are the ones who make decisions. And this male dominance or predominance in decision making can be seen also at the macro level. And if you see of late, there is a sort of crisis of masculinity. Earlier, the men were, as I said, the main decision makers. They were recognized as main decision makers. But gradually, with the coming of British, their land was alienated, they lost control over land and various other resources. Gradually, the men became, what you can say, their importance went down because their decision making power had no impact because finally what mattered was the law and what the state did. So the masculinity came into a crisis. What they thought, they were men, and so they were men who protected their women or protected the land and the village. Gradually that came into a question. And this table actually shows how there was a shift. I'm not going into the details of it, but now what was the reaction of the men to this? Gradually they started, tightening their hold over their tribal, villages and groups, so that the control that they earlier had was lost. Now, this was not done with the intention of subjugating women, but in the process, it so happened that women became, their position became more and more marginalized. So when they tightened the patrilineal practices of their villages or their groups, they gradually or unintentionally alienated women. So earlier perhaps women had more control or they could own land. Now with the state policy, with the law coming in, now women can actually, control land or own land. This became very, very closely, you could see that the masculine power, because it was in danger, the men tried to consolidate it as much as possible. And so you can see how, now this is one example. A lot of these communities are known for witch hunting. I'm sure you know or are aware of that. Now, a lot of people argue that witch hunting became more prominent. Witch hunting is where certain women are identified as witches, and they are, thrown out of the village, or in some cases they are killed because they are thought to be witches, and it's believed that if someone falls ill or someone dies, it was because of the black magic that this tribal woman did. So there's this word called Diane. These women are identified as Diane. Now, Diane or witch hunting became more prominent when there was a danger that a widow or a separated woman could claim, share in the land. So witch hunting also became, witch hunting has been there, with the tribal communities, but there are certain occasions where they become more active, or this witch hunting becomes more prominent at certain points of time. So some of those points of time are when the men start losing the control. Now, so the Adivasi politics, or I should have used the word tribal politics, is, I would say, in a dilemma. So the identity politics of tribals, which is mainly about restoring their autonomy. One of the major claims that tribals make is that we should make the decisions about our communities, our villages. So even in Chota Nagpur region, or you see the full-blown version of it in Northeast, where many of those tribal groups have actually got separate states because they said that we want to decide what we do about with our lives. So you have from the earlier Assam state, now you have 7 states which have come out, which are basically a result of the fight that they had about self-determination. So self-determination, autonomy definitely is important. And I think that should be the major, issue which should be talked about. But the question is, how do you address the question of gender here? Because if you look at these are some figures from Northeast. If you look at the legislative assemblies or bodies which are meant for political decision making, you can see how the percentage of women who are elected to these bodies or nominated to these bodies is not more than 4 to 5%. And if you look at these self-governance systems of various tribes from Chota Nagpur region, for example, all these bodies do not have any representatives, or if they have at all, very minimal representation of women. Now, the solidarity of tribal groups, which, as I showed, is maintained through kinship groups, because these kinship groups build up the larger community, and these kinship groups or clans are important parts of the tribal community, and that is how the tribal identity gets constructed. It's not just at the supra level or at the macro level; it gets constructed right from individual level. Definitely, solidarity is important. Yeah, and the whole demand for determination, self-determination, autonomy is also very important. But then, what do you do about the gender question? And from whatever limited reading that I could do, I can see that unless you redefine the identity politics of various tribal groups, where someone consciously tries to integrate the gender question also, perhaps these movements and these processes will marginalize women further, especially within the tribal community. And therefore, what I can see is there is a particular kind of rethinking or redefinition of the tribal identity politics that is required. Because otherwise, but yet there is a disclaimer, or there is a footnote here, that though these tribal communities have patrilineal, patrilocal, or patri-centered or social institutions and groups, the way the women are treated is in many ways very different. You can't compare them with the patrilineal groups of upper caste Hindu communities, where the marginalization of women is full blown and complete, where there are so many practices which are violent for the women. Even though these communities have patrilineal groups, the representation or the kind of violence that women face, if at all they do face, is very different in terms of quality and degree. So my this is a suggestion, or this is, I would say, a food for thought for all of you. Those of you who come from tribal communities and those of you who do not. Now, how do you integrate the gender question into the identity politics? And this is something which requires a lot of thinking. I don't have the answer to this question. I'm just posing it as a question to you. How do we redefine or reconfigure the identity politics? And here I'm talking about tribes, but this applies to even Dalits and even those. Because identity politics, as I said, is something which is very important and which is I think a very important part of the human psyche. So getting recognition, getting equal treatment is something which is equally there for every individual. So identity politics in that sense is very central to the human existence. But at the same time, then how would the masculinities be constructed and the femininities be constructed in the realm of identity politics? So that is what I had to say. Thank you for your presence and your patient hearing. Yeah, I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. It is always very good to hear you speak. Next, I would like to call Dr. Sridhar Modugu to enlighten us more about today's topic.
Can I say good evening to all of you? Because the weather, the ambience is like that. So So you have invited us with a pleasant word, Zohar. So, see, the meaning and context and its usage changes. So, I'm not making any disclaimers. My presence itself is a disclaimer. So what I would do is, see, while inviting me, you have also provided me with some information, putting some responses that came out in the context of recent elections for the election of the President of India, 15th President of India, Draupadi Murmu. So, when I received the invitation, I thought that, see, you have done research in this field, so you can speak early. So that's a different view, you will get it. So, simply I put it as, see, the studying tribes provided me livelihood throughout. So, after reaching TISS, I thought that it is not only me entire TISS is. So I didn't feel any guilty of it. So second thing, when we studied, right, there is a, whatever the kind of the protocols that are the concerns that Sai Madam was referring to, with the question of representation and bringing the entire discussion, she has made simple for me to go directly jump into the various things. Otherwise, if I have to put those things for discussion, then it's a different thing. So, I just give some background. So, I have studied in 1998 about agricultural practices of then primitive tribes. Now it is dropped to renamed to particularly vulnerable tribal communities. 1998 it was primitive tribes. So after studying them, I presented my study and my employers asked me, so study is done. I said no, not yet. So then what is left? Then I said, I have to present my findings to my information providers. Whoever provided me the information, whomever I have spoke to, I have to present to them. If they can go after seeing their reaction or response or dismissal, then only this study is complete. For them also it was eccentric, so somehow the rebuttal worked for me. When they offered me a livelihood, then I said that these NGOs, voluntary organizations, are postponing the revolution. To them only I said, and their face. Even TASS, I said that. Do you think that Karl Marx has written only capital? Volume 1, volume 2, volume 3. So that was a. I'm from a village, so not much different from whatever the tribal students in India, most of the tribal students in India have undergone. Not much different. So That is what, so I presented to them. Then they said that, what is new in it? You have brought in issues that some of them we forget. This is part and parcel of our knowledge. What is that new you did? Because you know language, you could present it in an order. After that, the employers of me asked me, what do you say? I pat myself. If they say that they do not know what is it, or when they say that it is not, that it is something else, or who can connect to it, then I have to rethink about it, or accept it as failure as a student. So, since they acknowledge this is all their memory and knowledge and also their experience, you can take it as completely. So wherever I study, I do like that. And ask the respondents to come and then present. The fortunate thing about my PhD is I did PhD in history. So no one will know me. No one is alive. So I'm lucky enough. There is no one to attend to. I have to accountable to. So this is not just like over the strong objectivity or over objectivity, whatever you think about or situational knowledge or whatever, representative knowledge. But as an ethics of it, part of ethics of the researcher. So then now coming to whatever you have demanded me. So I just briefly gone through my own take on very idea of India having a tribal women president. If you see the reception from various media reports and they are all recognized and really the path-breaking researchers and profound thinkers. Virginius Tata, Gopal Guru, and many others. They have all responded to it. And there is the mood of our time resonates in it. See, there are 2-3 things that follow. One is the reception of it, either pessimistic or ambitious or regaling. So you find various accounts. Someone says it's a tokenism. Someone says it gives hope and what is it? There is an interview I come across. I could not able to read the article of Deccan Herald. I have no subscription, so I found an interview of Gupta with this scholar called Cost Matters Book Writer. Suraj Engineering. So it is very many things he spoke, but out of the 2 things that struck me, one is this it gives a confidence for an individual. It is not that we are measuring her merit as the entire nation's merit or community's stake or their effort. But being known that the President of India is the highest position in India, first citizen of India. That gives a proudness. And another thing he gave is what? It gives hope. And it also informs that more than BJP, Bharatiya Janata Party, it's parental organization. Rashtriya Swayam Sevak Sangh is diversity. It has more diversity. Respect towards her, it has in its politics more diversity. So when you approach or when you see come across these kind of accounts from responses from various corners, and there are also political parties and its representatives comments, and Prime Minister Modi himself is delivering a lengthy statement and we give opportunity to the daughter of India who born in Eastern India, blah blah blah. We give the opportunity. Hmm? So see the kind of details that media covers are the reading that you get, you may get by a differential opinion. The difference of opinion is there among various scholars that who are living in the contemporary present, same moment, having the same similar experience and exposure to the information, but came out with different conclusions. So there is something called reparative reading. I used to bother my all the students saying, using my teacher's position. So that I asked them, what does mean by non-right? So they give different answers. One English one. So they also come to the ambiguous response saying that how does it matter? The meanings are there, word is same. So identical words, seemingly identical words have different meanings to different people. So that this will take you into a philosophy of social science. I'll say this by jumping into our concept. So simply put, when these are all the experts in the subject, the best, very respected scholars, not Tata, Gopal Guru, and another scholar I am referring to, they are not smart. They have contributed and they led the discipline. Social discipline and social science research. So they are nothing, and they are not smart. They are actually theoreticians who gave theory from there is some whenever I say Western modern theory or Western modern science, WMS I use. So But those are all now accepted categories. Whatever we read is limited. The available information. I used to also give certain exercises to students. There is a book titled as 18th Brunei of Louis Bonaparte. Translated into English by DDL. DDL. I asked them to come out with what is full name of the DDL. But start. Don't say that Dilwale Dulhania later. I gave them 3 class times. 3 times I postponed it. They could not get it. Why I am telling is that whatever you think that everything is available internet, or all is at our disposal, or it is in our plate, in our mouth, or whatever gadget you are holding, sometimes may not be true. Huh? So in this case also, I may not get access to all the available things. So, but I will just say that why there are differences of opinion, but the same event and same incident or same episode. The election of Srimati Draupadi Murmu as President of the India. So, there is one these historians think that students of history think that whenever doctors disagree so flagrantly, then the field is open to research. So you cannot dismiss that. That means you should not give a monopoly to anyone. So anyone in society at any point of time can come and engage with that. So this mood also represents the kind of political climate we are living in. Whenever we discuss about French history, age of revolution, age of terror, age of in a Marxian sense, who has reversed, try to put it on its place, the words of Hegel. Hegel said, somewhere said that everything in history happens twice. And Marx says that Hegel forget to add that first as past, second as tragic. So many, we can also say that the authoritarian vision all across, not just in India. When you pose a question, you may forget politics of obligation. Those who are in power, there are various political theories we have about voluntarism in the politics. Whether it is social contract theories or the later social scientists who deliberated on the how the obligation comes into operation. Even authoritarian regimes, when they are in power, they are dictatorial regimes. They control people through violence, utter violence. So they also think that people should have courtesy that we are concerned about that, obeying. So, but it's not immediately, but at a particular time, you have to respond to it. The authoritarian regimes in India did not come into existence without the proper process to elections. Whatever modus operandi is there. Even the President of India, so 15th President of India, also came into, let's say, following the procedure. Election. But how to assess that? Sai was speaking about Francis Fukuyama. This is also from the right of Exclusion. So he says that one interesting observation about identity politics. I just try to discuss that in my last class with the students of DASS. There is a book by Sabyasachi as Intractable Discourses, English language. It's a very introduction starts with that quote from Fukuyama. So after world across identity movements, whether they ended up in their respective goals or not, when they achieved. But most of the things that follow are designed on the grounds of economic viability. Say, for example, OBC reservations, you hired adults, and the representation of various classes. So when it comes, when recognized and when the struggle succeed and established that way, then they were not independent. They were designed with economic logic or some other. Cause. And then whenever PESA or whenever this so-called Forest Rights Act 2006, the confessionary words saying that historical, it is undoing the historical injustice done to the tribes. So, by writing that, those words, sweet words, and by electing our own member to the highest seat of the power, will cancel all the atrocities and the kind of oppression or kind of violence instituted on the people, perpetuated on the people. Can it cancel? The kind of things that are coming up from the Kerala state, from the High Court, are really glaring. But people wonder how can an educated person, just a judge, High Court judge, can utter those kind of words. Huh? So if I am representing you, you cannot file a case on me under SC/ST Atrocities Act. What a reading. Paternalism of the ultimate sort. This is what reparative reading. You have to go into that. Identical things does not mean the same. And there is also another positive aspect. Whenever you say indigenous people state. When words become popular and powerful and widely used, what will happen is that word's intended meaning will go against it and opposite to it, to the original root meaning of that word. I'll give an instance. But subaltern studies in India started with big brigade in 1981-82. Everyone, post-emergency days and the auxiliary are voicing in that language, so people grab it. But when they define what is subaltern, then people have to step back. According to those scholarship, subaltern are not the working class or Adivasis or Dalits or so not those. They are never part of that subaltern studies values. They never study Dalit women tribes. They never study. They take the 12 volumes, you don't find. It came that India was colonized for before. All Indians are indigenous and all Indians are subaltern. So provincializing Europe. I have shared one beautiful interview with my students. You can also take it from them and listen. By Deepesh Chakrabarti. Very interesting. Many of your concerns are addressed in a way. He's a very celebrated scholar from the gang of subaltern studies. So I'm putting only problems. See, you are all writing your dissertations, writing research proposals, going to present. Yes? So how do you? I thought of executing in that framework. Then sometimes I have information, sometimes I don't. Given very short notice, I could not prepare myself. So, what is the problematic here? There are conflicting views about the same reality, social reality. Then which one is correct and which one is wrong? In a crudest words, is there truth in it? Reality, social reality, all are constructed. Okay? With an examination, one can prove that. So, when this is the case, when you are receiving this kind of responses from the authorities in the subject, you will get confused with whether the scholars confused or are we confused. Scholars are clear. I'll give you a beautiful explanation sometime back. There is a very brilliant theorist in India that India has its Gopal. You read his one-page editorial from the editor's desk in Economic and Political Weekly, every issue. After he became the editor of Economic and Political Weekly, he is writing. Those things, once you read it, you don't require any class in this. You can understand. Very beautiful, one page. If you can't read one page, also I am helpless. We have chosen this page, so we have to pay minimum. So, this response, this title was In Search of a Robust Egalitarian. With reference to these kind of different expressions, Gopal Guru observed that this is not to suggest that public opinions are less important just because they are considered as lacking in effective executive power, or they derive their power practically from the rituals of constitutional protocol. So, it's a tokenism of reducing it to planning it, tokenism of planning it, joyfulness or hope, or giving a dignity. Or it is a ceremonial, many kind of responses. He was telling that one has to wait for substance until she completes the term, and then see how substantial. I put it in one word, not in symbolic terms, substantial terms. This reading of the power of the president cannot be sustained on the grounds that there are notable examples who, during the tenure of the president, have lived up to the constitutional reputation of the coveted post. Thus, converting the symbolic into the substantive depends on the person's capacity for autonomy that is necessary to convert an opportunity into an asset. An asset not just for the Dalits, the Adivasis, or